Welcome in to Says Who Sports right now. One of the all-time great caddies on the PGA Tour, has done it at a high level for 35 years plus. Spent 20 years on the bag for Fred Couples, including Fred's 92 Masters win. Was with Dustin Johnson. Spent over a decade caddying for Tiger Woods, including Tiger's 19 Masters win. Currently on the bag for Patrick Cantlay, number 11 in the FedEx Cup rankings. The pride of Newtown, Connecticut, and as big a sports fan as you'll find on the PGA Tour. Joe LaCava joins us. Joe, welcome to Says Who Sports, and thanks for being here.
Of course, John. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on today. Really jacked up for it.
Absolutely, Joe. Thank you. Appreciate you. So do you have a break until Greensboro next week with the Olympics? What's your schedule like now?
Yeah, I've got, well, we just played the British Open, so I got home last Monday, and I have 3 weeks off before we start the playoffs. I don't think Pat's going to play Greensboro, which is fine.
Sure.
And then just get ready for the 3 playoffs, because it's a long stretch and there's a little travel involved. You got to go to Memphis, Denver, and Atlanta, and obviously the big prize at the last tournament in Atlanta is a big one. So you want to kind of save yourself. You don't want to play too many tournaments. So I think Greensboro would add one and make 4, and I don't think he's going to do 4 in a row.
Gotcha. Understand.
Yeah.
What are you doing during your break, Joe? Are the Yankees at home? Have you been to a game, going to a game?
You know, I always keep an eye on the Yankees, obviously, and I was actually watching the game. I was in Long Island yesterday playing golf, and I was watching the game on my phone, extra innings against the Phillies. They won the first 2 against the Phillies, so they're starting to kind of maybe snap out of it a little bit. They made that trade with the Marlins, and that seems to help. So I probably won't get to a game. I'll just do a little, I'll play a little lousy golf. And then I'll do a little bit of yard work and maybe spend some time with my daughter and my wife.
Nice.
Yeah.
Rejuvenation of sorts.
Right.
You've done a lot of traveling for decades for work, well over, safe to say, right, 100 days a year or more for a long time. Does the travel, Joe, take more of a toll now than back in the day, or minimal impact? I mean, staying in nice hotels, maybe Airbnbs, but still on the road. How's that feel now versus back in the day?
Great question. You know, back like everything else, back in the day when you're young, not much seems to bother you and you don't mind the travel and you kind of get caught up right away with the jet lag and so on and so forth. But as I get older, it's tougher with the travel. But you adjust because that's what you do and that's part of the gig and you have to do it. Being away from the family was always the toughest part of my gig way back in the day when the kids were young. Now that the kids are older and out of the house, it's not so bad because you don't feel so guilty about not being home when these things are happening, like sports games, birthdays, and stuff like that. But getting back to the travel part of it, I don't mind it. Listen, I was spoiled for 10 years traveling with Tiger on his jet. Not every single time, but enough times where it was nice. The only problem with that is when you get off Tiger's plane, you get back to reality, you're back there in 27B at Delta. It's just not quite the same. The seats get smaller and smaller.
Yeah, that's a tough comeback to reality. What's your interest level for watching the Olympic golf competition now?
It's one of those things where I'm a morning person, and it's on early in the morning, which benefits me. So when I get up, I'll throw the TV on and watch, 4 or 5 holes. And then obviously if one of the Americans has a shot on Sunday, I'll try to make it a point to watch at least the last 5 or 6 holes. I don't watch a ton of golf, but I'll watch the bigger tournaments. But, I'm kind of tight with Xander because him and Pat are such good friends, and I love Scotty. Colin's a good guy, and so is Wyndham Clark. And I know all their caddies pretty well, too, and I like those guys a lot. So if any of those guys are in contention on Sunday, I'll watch some, but I won't watch a ton.
How do you sum up Patrick's season to this point, Joe? No wins yet, some top 10s in there.
Yeah, I would say a pretty solid season, but you hit it right on the head when you don't win. And you get close a couple of times and don't quite cross that finish line. It can be a little frustrating, and I think Pat's a little frustrated at this point because I think he feels like he had a couple chances out there. He had a chance at Riv, he had a chance at the U.S. Open, and he had a chance in Memphis last year. So he's been around the league, kind of contending and stuff like that. So like you hit it on the head at the beginning of the show, he's 11th in FedEx Cup points, so you certainly can't complain about that. Having only played 15 tournaments because he plays a little less than most. But at the same time, you obviously want to break through and get that win. And now, obviously, his best buddies won 2 majors. So that's probably even more frustrating for Pat because he feels like they're probably equals in terms of that. But, Pat's time is hopefully coming.
Sure. How did it work out, Joe, that you are with Patrick? Was that largely driven by the injuries to Tiger?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, Tiger was playing less and less. Obviously, he's getting healthier, but I don't think it's ever going to be healthy with the point we can play a full schedule, which a full schedule for him is only 12 tournaments. I was around for 2 or 3 years, and we still remain very, very good friends. And I was kind of sticking it out, hoping that he would get better. I still think he is going to get better, but he's almost 50 years old, and he actually told me, listen, even if I get healthier, I'm still not going to play a lot. I know how much you miss caddying and being out there and competing with these guys. So if there is an opportunity out there and it comes along, have at it.
Joe, talk about the importance of trust between player and caddy. It's everything, right?
It really is. I mean, I tell people the same thing every time they ask me this question. The caddy part is relatively easy. I think all the caddies do a good job. They do their homework. They walk the golf courses. Most of the guys are very good players. They know how to play golf and stuff like that. I think, like you said, there's a trust factor. You got to be able to get along with your guy. You got to have some fun with your guy. Now the players and the caddies do a lot off the golf course because the families don't always travel every single week. And who's your next best buddy? Well, normally it's your caddy. So you're doing a lot of stuff together off the golf course. You have to trust each other. You have to have faith in each other. And you got to be able to get along. There's going to be times when it's not so great, and there's times when your guy's not playing so well, but that's when you got to give him a little bit of a pep talk and give him a little kick in the butt and get him going in the right direction. So there is that trust factor for sure.
You started caddying in the late 80s, caddied a bit for your cousin and former PGA golfer Ken Green, who won some tournaments on the tour. How did you get the job with Freddie?
That's a good question. Like you said, I had a 3-year stint with Ken, who was fantastic. I think he won 3 events, actually won another big event in Japan. So things were going along very well for us. He made a Ryder Cup team, and then it kind of caught me off guard at the end of 1989. Ken mentioned to me, listen, my brother's out of work. He's got a wife and a couple of kids. I need to, provide some income for him. I think I'm going to hire him as my next caddy. And I totally respected that. He was taking care of his brother, who's out of work and has a family. So I was kind of like in panic mode because I was just settling into this caddying thing. I'm 3 years in. Obviously, there's some success with Ken, so you're enjoying that part of it. But I'm just loving the caddy life. And then when I worked that Ryder Cup in 89, I was all in after I worked that Ryder Cup in 89. This is the only thing I wanted to do. So now Ken didn't tell me till the end of the season, so I'm thinking to myself, now what do? I have a finance degree. I can go back on that. But to me, there's no looking back. I want this caddying thing for the rest of my life. I'm enjoying it so much. So I reached out to Fred at the last tournament that year, 1989. The last tournament back then was the Disney Classic down in Orlando. And Fred and his caddy split like in May or June of that year. And the rumor was going around that Fred was looking for someone full-time for the following year. So he was trying different guys when they had off weeks to see if they got along and stuff like that in hopes of hiring someone full-time the following year. And I said, you know what, I've only been out here 3 years. I don't know Fred that well, but I know him to say hello. We've been paired with him a couple times. I'm going to reach out to him at the Disney and see what he has to say. So I found him at the Disney, told him what was going on. He said, give me a call in the off season, and we'll kind of see what happens. So I called him in the off season, couldn't get a hold of him back in the day. I was back home in Connecticut visiting my parents for Christmas, and I said to my dad, I said, listen, we need to get an answering machine. And he said, what do you mean an answering machine? This is 1989. Nobody had an answering machine. He didn't even know what one was. And I said, well, I'm trying to get this job with Fred Couples. If I call him and he calls me back, I don't know Fred that well, but I got a feeling he's not going to call more than twice. And if nobody's around, I'm not going to stay home all day, although I probably should have, just to make sure I got that call. Right. And so my dad was looking at me again like I was an idiot wanting an answering machine, didn't know what it was. So I actually went down to Bradley's, which was like today's Kmart, and got an answering machine and hooked it up. And fortunately for me, Fred called right around Christmas time. He says, "How you doing? Let's give it a go on the West Coast. I'm playing these 4 tournaments, and we'll see how it goes." I said, "That's all I can ask for. That's fantastic." So we played Phoenix, the Bob Hope, San Diego, and L.A. And L.A. was the 4th one of the 4. And I think the first 3 top 10 them all. Obviously, Fred was the guy that had all the potential, great swing, the whole 9 yards. And then he ends up winning the L.A. Open, which is the last leg of the West Coast. And so I remember we went to the airport together on Sunday night, and he wrote me a check, and he says, "I'll see you in Miami." And so he never really officially said, "I'm hiring you, you got the job." Like I said, he wrote me a check, see you in Miami. I didn't ask any questions. I'm like, I'm not even going to ask. I said, I'm just going to take the check, run with it, and see you in Miami. And then 20 years later, we were still best of buddies, and that's what happened.
That's outstanding. Thanks so much for sharing that, Joe. And you mentioned, so you're out with Freddie for just a few years. You'd only been in the game, so to speak, for a few years at that level. And then Freddie wins the 92 Masters, and you're with him. His only major win. Describe what that win at the Masters in 92 was like for you at the time.
Right. Well, like you said, you made a good point. I'm only 4 or 5 years into it. I think I'm 27 or 20 years old at the time. So you just think this is kind of second nature because Fred contended in 90-91 at the Masters. So I just assumed that was going to be the case every year. He's going to win more majors, and this is going to be easy, so to speak. But I remember leading up to the Masters in 92, that was probably Fred's best run right around before and after the Masters. He went to the West Coast and played very, very well. He won the LA Open in a playoff against Davis Love. And then he went down to Miami and played very, very well. Did not win, but played well. Then he lost in a playoff to Corey Pavin. Then he went up to Bay Hill and won by 9 shots, which was unheard of back then. Mm-hmm. He absolutely lapped the field. Then I think he shot 63 Saturday at TPC. Did not win, but was playing very well. So the point I'm trying to make is he had a great 2-month run leading up to the Masters. Now we get to the Masters, I'm thinking to myself, oh, my God, a couple things are going to happen here. I said he could peter out a little bit because he's so tired. When you play well, there's a lot of press, a lot of obligations, and you get beat up mentally and physically. And then I said, I'm usually optimistic, but I'm thinking of all the pessimistic things. So then I also said to myself, he knows he's playing the best golf of his life. He's 32, I think, at the time. I think in the back of his mind, he probably knows his time. He's got to capitalize on how great he's playing. Like I said, he's in the prime of his career. It's his favorite tournament, the Masters. So it's kind of now or never kind of thing. And to his credit, he rose to the occasion. He hung tough all week, played great. And then my favorite part of that Masters was when we got to the 72nd hole, Fred hit it in the bunker, the fairway bunker there, and he had a 2-shot lead over Raymond Floyd, who was in the house.
Dr. Floyd.
Right. And so then I go back to my thing again. I'm thinking, now I'm kind of choking and panicking on the tee, because now in my mind I'm thinking of all the ways that Fred can make a 6 and end up tied and have to go into playoffs. So I'm thinking, okay, he can hit the lip of the bunker, come back, he can chunk it out, knock it on 3 putts. So I'm thinking of all the ways to make a 6. And back then, the pin was all the way in the back left. So it wasn't that easy a pin to get to. And it wasn't an automatic with the back slope to that front left pin. So a much, much tougher pin. And I'll never forget, he looked at me and says, "Where's the ball?" Off the tee. And I said, "Bunker." And he looked at me as if to say, "I'm going to calm you down right now." And he said, "No problem." Ooh. It was almost like he could read my mind, like, stop panicking, I got this thing covered. Don't be choking on me now on the 72nd hole. And so he hit the 7-iron up there, one grain of sand, and hit it up there 15 feet, 20 feet, pin high right. Basically, he made a 2. That's how good he was playing. Made an easy 2-putt and won by 2. And, as a young kid, it was just absolutely incredible for me to be there with Fred when he won his first Masters.
Outstanding, Joe. Yeah. You were with him for 20 years, obviously learned a lot from him, and I'm sure he learned plenty from you. What was the most important thing, Joe, you learned from Freddie about golf and life?
I think what I always remember is early on working for Fred, he would play with Tom Watson, Raymond Floyd, guys like that, and he would absorb all their knowledge, but he did it in such a way that they enjoyed Fred's company. In other words, they knew he was out there picking their brains, wanting to learn from the best at certain golf courses. But he came across in such a way that he wasn't a pain in the neck. He wasn't like, "What's this do? What's that do?" That kind of thing. Just everybody loves Fred and his demeanor. And I'll never forget, a lot of times he'd sit around, again, without being a pain in the neck, and just observe these guys and watch what they were doing in practice rounds, learn how to play a practice round, learn how to get the most out of a practice round. Learn their practice habits. I know Fred actually spent some time with Raymond Floyd down in Florida on occasion, and he also went up to Tom Watson's in Kansas City and spent time with him. So I always tell people, Fred's dumb like a fox. He's a very smart guy, but he just wants everyone to do everything for him. So he pretends like he doesn't know what's going on, so you'll do it for him, but he knows exactly what's going on. So I think I kind of learned from that myself. I think to myself, okay, when we play these practice rounds, obviously I'm paying attention to Fred, whoever I'm working for, but I'm also watching other guys and their chips and their putts and what they're doing. So you can learn a lot in practice rounds from what other guys are doing. And then I kind of, now that I got older, I try to, convey that to like Dustin and Pat and stuff like that. it's important you get to the golf course. Obviously, you got to practice as hard as you can, but you have to be efficient too. You don't have to hang there all day or 10 hours just to feel like you're getting stuff done. Do it in a good, solid way. Like I'm trying to get Pat to play more practice rounds earlier on, maybe play more holes and get a little more out of a practice round instead of playing at 11 or 12 o'clock in the afternoon when it's crowded. It takes longer and you're getting less out of the round, believe it or not.
So that working smarter thing, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that goes a long way.
Absolutely. You caddied for Tiger for over a decade, obviously, would likely still be with him if he were able to be out there regularly and the injuries weren't such a factor. Joe, will you describe the difference in the mental preparation or approach to the game between Freddie and Tiger? And by that I mean Tiger, as we know, lived and breathed golf and big on details. Different with Freddie?
Yeah, I mean, Fred's one of those guys where, he's very laid back, but at the same time, I mean, he is intense on the golf course. But Fred's MO is, he wants to start thinking when he gets to the first tee and think for 4.5 or 5 hours. That's what he wants to do. He'll start grinding once he gets to that first tee. And he'll grind for 4.5, 5 hours. And when he gets off the golf course, he's done. Wants nothing to do with it. I'll take a guy like Tiger. Like you said, he's 24/7. I'll get a text at 2 or 3 in the morning, and he'll tell me, listen, it's going to be a southwest wind tomorrow. It's changing. I think it's a 3-wood on number 12 instead of a driver. And I'm a pretty light sleeper, so I hear the phone and I look at it, and I said, okay. I said, you know what, Tiger, I actually agree with you. That's probably true, but I'd rather you turn the phone off and get some sleep right now. Right? We got a big day tomorrow. You're grinding. Like you said, he never turns that off 24/7. He's thinking. And he's very detailed, but I mean, at the same time, he's not one of those guys that ever comes back at you if you make a mistake. He kind of lets you caddy. Oh, yeah, he's probably the easiest guy, the best guy to caddy for in that sense, because we all make mistakes, but he never comes back to me once. Like and I read a decent amount of putts for him, and if he doesn't make the putt, a lot of times I'll ask him, what did it do? And I'm thinking, I want to know for next time. And he'll say, I pulled it or I pushed it. It's never, you read it wrong or we read it wrong or stuff like that. He's always making an excuse not to beat me up. And I said, Tiger, stop being so nice. What did it do? I want to know for next time. He goes, I pulled it, pushed it, stuff like that. But another example between Fred and him, like if we're on the range, let's say for an 8:30 tee time and it's 7:45 and we're warming up, Tiger's asking me, what's it going to be on 5? What's the number going to be on 7? Where's the wind going to be on 11? So he's kind of going through maybe not every hole, but he's getting a sense of how the golf course is going to play. And that's at 7:45 from 8:30 tee time. At 7:45 in the morning from 8:30 tee time, all Fred wants to know is he turns and looks at me and says, "Where are we eating tonight, Joey?" So they are definitely different personalities in terms of that. You just adapt. I love them both for those reasons, but you learn to adapt as a caddy.
Talk about Joe Tiger's mental toughness, his tenacity, especially in those recent years of fighting through serious leg pain just to get around the course.
Yeah, he's a warrior, as I call him. I mean, he knows no other way. He talks about his dad telling him to grind it out in the dirt, find it in the dirt, stuff like that. He's one of those guys. He's not a country clubber growing up. He's always had to grind a little bit. I'll never forget. Sometimes we'd be on the range or watching a guy in the short game area, a guy like Phil Mickelson has an incredible short game. He kind of admired how good those guys' short games were, or how they hit fairway bunker shots and stuff like that. So you could see him kind of learning and paying attention to what they're doing and trying to put that into his own game. And he also knew that, listen, this guy's got a better short game than me, but the only way I'm going to get better than him or just as good as him is I'm going to have to outwork him. That was his philosophy on everything. I don't have the most people think that's crazy. Obviously, he's got a ton of talent, don't get me wrong. But in certain areas, he thought all the guys had more talent than him, and he thought the only way he could catch up to those guys is to outwork them. And that's just kind of his model through life. And he's doing the same thing with these injuries. He's one of those guys where he may not let an injury heal because he thinks that's not helping. He's all about getting in the gym, working, getting after it, and making that thing better by working hard. That's just how he is.
Right on. Great stuff. Tell us, Joe, about the time Tiger got, I mean, you guys shared a lot of meals, obviously, many years on the road. And as you've said, room service most of the time, obviously tough for Tiger to go out. But he invited you to dinner at a steakhouse, right? And how you learned that Tiger was on what you called Tom Coughlin time.
Right, right. Well, it is a pretty good story. So 2 or 3 weeks in, he says, "Do you want to have a good steak tonight? I know a good steak joint." I said, "Of course. You're kidding me? I love steak." He says, "Okay, 5 o'clock at wherever it was." And I said, "No problem." And so I get there right at 5 o'clock, maybe 2 minutes to 5 o'clock. And I walk in, and there's nobody in the restaurant. I think they open at 5. And there's nobody in the restaurant. And it's kind of dark. And I'm thinking to myself, where is this guy? So I kind of see him all the way in the back, gives me a little bit of a wave. And it's like, okay, perfect. Just going to be 2 of us. We'll kind of get to know each other, kind of one of those things, and have some fun and talk family and sports and whatever. And so as I'm getting closer to the table, I realize he's basically halfway through his steak. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, was it 4:30? Did I screw up the time? He goes, no, 5 o'clock. And looked at me like, no big deal, 5 o'clock. And it's literally, I think at this point, by the time I walked over the table, maybe 5:01. And he's halfway through his steak, and I see the salad plate over there, and I see the baked potatoes already gone. And so I sit down. Now the waiter comes over. He says, "What do you want?" And I'm basically, don't even look at the menu. So I'll take the same thing he's having. I figured, it's a strip, whatever. I can't go wrong with that. Mm-hmm. At least I can maybe catch up to the guy, and they'll bring it out right away and have a little bit of a meal with him. Well, 3 minutes later, he had eaten his steak. The waiter comes back. He hands him the credit card. He goes, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." And that was it. I sat with him literally for 4 minutes while he finished his second half of his steak, and he got up and left. And I'm thinking, okay. And that's when I said to myself, okay, 5 o'clock means 10 of 5. If you're there at 5 o'clock, you're late, like Tom Coughlin used to say. And then people say to me, come on, he didn't really actually leave the table. I said, no, he left the table. He was done. Dinner was done. He was done.
So was it an intentional lesson to you in a way, or unintentional? That's just obviously how he rolls.
Yeah, no, definitely not intentional. I mean, you might think that because I didn't know him that well at the time, but not intentional at all. Now, if I had been, obviously as a caddy, if you meet your player at 5 o'clock, you're there basically at 4:15. That's just not, that doesn't work that way in the caddy world, in your job. But
sure,
if you prefer a casual dinner, no big deal. But no, it wasn't intentional at all. I just think he's one of those guys where, that ADD kicked in. You know what I mean? He got hungry, left his hotel, got there at 10:05. I don't think it dawns on him that I'm getting there at 5. When he sits down, he's going to order, right? You know what I mean? So I think it's one of those things.
Absolutely. So he wins. Tiger wins the 19 Masters. You're with him, of course. He gives you the big hug on 18 after clinching it. Describe what that win and those moments were like for you, Joe.
Same thing. People always say to me, what was more fun or a bigger win, that or at Fred's? I would say they're tied. They're the same because I would be doing injustice to the other guy if I said one or the other. But obviously, he's Tiger. He's coming off all these injuries. They say the greatest comeback of all time. People didn't. He was never going to win anything again. He wins the Masters. So obviously, it's a bigger moment. It's an incredible moment. But going back to what you just mentioned, the fact that the first thing he says to me is, "We did it." Not many guys say that. Now, the guys all think that we're a team. Don't get me wrong, but for him to actually verbally say it, it gives me goosebumps even talking about it now. The fact, and the best part of it is, although the people don't know him as well, obviously, as I do, he actually means that. I've always been part of the team. I've always been more friend than caddy to Tiger. That's just how he treats people, and that's how he treats people around him in his circle. The circle's small, but inside that circle, he treats the people incredibly well. So for him to say that, and I knowing he means it, meant the world to me. And it got even better after that, because after we celebrate and have a nice hug, to see him go to the back of the green and hug his kids and hug his mom, to me was just incredible. Because regardless of what's happening in his life in the past, he's an incredible dad. He loves those kids like there's no tomorrow. The kids actually flew up that morning knowing that he was going to have a chance, because when he'd been winning majors and tournaments, they were much, much younger, and they never saw one, basically. So to see him go over there and see that smile and just the intensity of those hugs, it's incredible. Something I'll never forget.
Special stuff, Joe. And so you were out there, we're watching it, TV. You can still feel that electricity. The back nine, especially getting down to those last 4 or 5 holes. You're out there with him. Describe that electricity, that atmosphere.
Yeah, I'll go back to the 12th hole because I think that's kind of when it turned around. You can almost hear like the hush around the crowd, because now you got all these guys hitting it into Race Creek on number 12. You see Poulter, you see Brooks in front of us, and obviously Frankie, and Tony Finau. I mean, 4 guys hit it in the water on that hole out of the last 2 groups, the 6 people that played it. And the only guy of the 6 that hit the green was Tiger, because Webb Simpson hit it over the green. So, when that thing turned around, as a 2-shot difference. Tiger makes a nice 6 or 7 footer for par. Molinari makes double. All of a sudden, now it's tie ball game. Now all of a sudden, it's like, it wasn't so much that people were screaming and going crazy. It's almost like they were quiet, thinking, "Oh my God, okay, now we've got a chance." I mean, Tiger got a chance, and it's almost like a quietness around the golf course. Like, okay, game on, because now it's Tiger's time. He's tied with 6 or 7 holes to go. It's his to win, and people can feel the fact that Tiger's done this in the past. He's probably going to do it again, but he hasn't been there in a while, so it's going to get pretty juicy and pretty dicey here. And people always say to me, "Well, when did you think he was going to win the thing?" I said, "Well, I never thought that until he actually held the putt on 18. But what I will tell you is when we got to 13T, if you start doing the math, I'm thinking to myself, there's going to be a lot of mid-iron shots coming in, including the par 5s. And if Tiger can hit some good drives, he is definitely going to capitalize and win this tournament, because I consider him the greatest iron player of all time. And that's exactly what happened. He had good, solid iron shots. Obviously, he drove it well, too. But he had great iron shots into all these par 5s and long par 4s, and obviously the one on 16 was incredible. So he capitalized with his iron game and made a couple putts, and the rest is history, as they say.
How did you celebrate that night, Joe?
Well, it's funny you say that. So we played early that day because of the storms, which actually was another factor, the fact that if they don't move the tee times up, we're in a twosome in the second to last group. Now we're in the last group with Tony and Frankie, and I think that helps. They talk about the Tiger factor and guys being intimidated. I don't know if it's as much it is in 19 it was way back in his prime, but still, it's nice to be with the guys that are ahead of you and playing with them to put a little heat on them. I think if Tony and Frankie been in the last group by themselves, they got less people watching, less people moving around, and maybe just a little bit more comfortable and easier. So I think that helped. But fast forward to when we got done, we played early. I do whatever. We're hanging out with Tiger. We go into the I don't know what they call it there down at Augusta, but there's a ballroom, let's say. And they bring us in there, and they bring Tiger's little inner circle in there for a little speech with Tiger and Fred Ridley, which was fantastic. Because normally I don't think the caddies are a part of that, but when you're Tiger's caddy, it's a little, maybe a little more special. But it was kind of a weird moment because you got a room of probably 200 people in there, and I call them green jackets, which are members. So you got 100 guys with their green jackets on, all their wives with beautiful dresses on. And then we come in with our crew. We're dressed in golf gear. I actually had my Saquon Barkley T-shirt on, and I'm all sweaty. You're sticking out like a sore thumb. But the members couldn't have been any nicer. Tiger gave a nice speech. Fred really gave a great speech. So that kind of kicked off the afternoon. But believe it or not, since we played early, most of my buddies either went home because they got flights out of there, or they went to Hilton Head. So none of my buddies were around, but my wife was around. So as I'm leaving the caddy pen, a couple of the local caddies who were hanging around for the week said, "Where are you going to celebrate? What are you going to do?" And I said, "That's a good question. I don't really know. I haven't had that game plan yet. Most of my buddies are out of town." So I'm checking my texts. They've all left. They feel bad about leaving. I said, "Why do you feel bad about leaving? Go home, see your families, or do whatever."
Sure.
And so, a couple of the local caddies said, "We're going over to Hooters if you want to come over and have a beer." And so I looked at my wife. I said, "All right, what do you think, Hooters?" I mean, I'm not anti-Hooter, but I'm not a regular at Hooters. And to my wife's credit, she said, "Yeah, let's go. We'll have a couple of beers, and then we'll go to the next spot." Well, we sat there for 4 hours and had more than a couple of beers, and we had a great time.
Joe LaCava celebrating a Masters win at Hooters. That's outstanding. Speaking of celebration, Joe, the Ryder Cup last fall, Patrick Cantlay had a tough Saturday, then drains 3 birdies in a row. You're feeling it on the green. Rory McIlroy doesn't like it, expresses that. What I would say, certainly heat of the moment, big competition, sports stuff. Have you and Rory ever talked about it? Or is there nothing to say?
Just not a lot to say. You hit it right on the head. Heat of the moment thing. Obviously, I'm fired up. Get caught up in the moment. I'm waving the hat around. My team's in the front of the green, and I see all those guys, the players and the caddies and the captains and vice captains. So we're all having a good time. We're just trying to have a little fun with the crowd back. So we took it all day. And it was a very positive thing for our squad to try to win a match. And like you said, at that time, Pat, I think, was 0-2. So it looked like we finally might win a match and get a point, maybe get some momentum going. And, Rory's fired up too because he's trying to win the match. So we still remain buddies to this day. We were never best of friends anyway, so it wasn't like there was a big deal. And we've had a little conversation, but we're all good.
Sure, yeah. Just, again, big-time competition, heat of the moment stuff.
Yeah.
You have had some high-profile gigs, obviously, and are considered, I think, widely among the best ever. Why do you think that is, Joe, from a caddy perspective? Why so much praise? What separates you from the others?
That's a good question. To be honest with you, I'm uncomfortable with the praise. I tell people, people always say you're in the Caddy Hall of Fame. I said, well, you can do the math. I'm in the Caddy Hall of Fame because I work for Hall of Fame golfers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, Gypsy Joe Grillo, who's an old-time caddy back in the day, goes, what makes a great caddy? Going to the first tee with a great player. The players deserve all the credit. I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. I think if you can mix with the right personality, that helps a lot. And I think, working for Fred Couples, who doesn't like Fred Couples? Everyone on tour likes Fred. So I think that helps getting the Tiger gig because Tiger kind of idolized Fred growing up. So that opened a lot of doors for me. And like I said, everybody loves Fred, so they kind of like the caddy too. And I'd like to think I do a pretty good job for the guys. I feel like I read greens very well. So I think that helps in our industry a lot. But there's so many good caddies out there doing such a great job. I did an article for, I think, Golf Digest or something, and I talked about how, these young kids are coming up. I call them wannabes. So the guys that kind of wanted to play on tour but just really didn't make it. And the two examples I used was Joe Griner working for Max Homa, and I call him Big Money Austin, who works for Xander Schauffele. These kids are young. They work hard. They're very positive out there with their guys. They're good players in their own right. So there's a ton of good caddies out there, working for great players. And like I said, I think the reason you hear my name maybe a little more often than most is because of the guys that I've worked for. Basically, that's what it comes down to.
Right on. I appreciate that. As mentioned, you are a big-time sports fan away from the golf course, especially your New York teams. What's the first professional game you went to, Joe? And did you go with your dad?
Yeah, wow, that is a great question. And most people know that answer. I would guess it was either a Yankee game or a Giant game, but I don't remember that for a fact. The only thing I kind of remember, and when I was young, I was probably 10 or 12 years old, my dad did take me to a Knicks game. And he was a big Dave DeBusschere fan. And so I became a Dave DeBusschere fan. And I'll never forget. So he tried to get an autograph. So literally, this is back in the day. So, I was born in 64. So this is probably mid-70s, let's say.
Sure.
And somehow, I was kind of walking with him, and we got our way down to the bench somehow. Because like you said, I guess you could do it back in those days, right? And so then we finally got almost to the bench, and the security guy tried to stop my dad. And I remember my dad trying to hand him a few bucks. And it must have been the end of the game. It's kind of blurry, but it must have been to hand him a few bucks to try to get Dave DeBusschere's autograph on the program. And so I remember, and like I said, I can't remember much, but this was like it was yesterday. Sure. And I remember the security guard kind of going like, no, I don't need your money. And he kind of gave me, go ahead, but make it quick, without really saying anything. Nice. And so my dad kind of tapped DeBusschere on the back of the shoulder. He turned around, he signed the program for us, and then we left. So that was my first remembering of a game. I don't remember the actual first game that I went to.
That's big. Dave DeBusschere
right.
moment with your dad in the garden. That's
right.
as good as it gets. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say exactly right. That's as good as it gets.
Did you go to, you love your Giants,
right.
NFL, New York Giants. Did you go to any of the Giants Super Bowls?
I've actually
Parcells era or Eli?
I've actually been to three. So I'm 3-0. I'm 3-0 as a fan. So if any Giant, the owners are listening, maybe they'll have me at the next one. But I went to the Pasadena one. That was Parcells, obviously. And then I went to the two Eli Manning ones, the one in Arizona, the one in Indianapolis.
Isn't it crazy thinking about, and I think that was Pasadena, right? Scott Norwood, and, just like you've seen on the tour, and the greats that go down in history get that signature win, a Masters or Super Bowl triumph, and the difference, somebody misses a putt, right, by that much. Yeah. A lot of similarity there.
It doesn't take much, right?
It doesn't take much, exactly. who have you golfed with? Speaking of all of those guys, those athletes, who have you golfed with among them? I mean, have you been out with Aaron Judge ever?
I've actually never met Aaron Judge. But I've been out with Jeter a little bit because he's friends with Tiger, so I played a little bit of golf with him.
How's his game, Joe?
It's come a long ways. I think the first time we played with him was in a pro-am, and it was kind of scrappy, but I think he was just starting to take up the game. I don't think he played at all until after he retired, basically. But obviously he's very athletic. And then I think we played with him a couple years later, and they'd gotten much, much better. Like all those guys, once they catch on and have the passion. Yesterday I actually played shinny with Brad Richards. So that was a blast.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a very tough golf course, but Richie's he's a fanatic when it comes to golf, and I think he won a Stanley Cup with the Chicago Blackhawks. And I played a little golf with Mark Bavaro. We can go on and on. I hate to be a name dropper, but I played with some big time athletes and some of them are guys that I actually loved growing up. So it's been a good run in terms of that.
Speaking of those giants and those greats, did you ever? Were you ever on the Bag Forge? Did you ever play around with LT?
We played in a couple of pro-ams of the old Bob Hope.
Okay.
He smashes it. Same thing. He's one of those guys who are very passionate, plays 36, 45 holes a day. Those guys are nuts because you still want to do something competitive. Obviously, you can't play golf at 40 or 50, 60 years old. You can't play football at 40 or 50 or 60. So basically, golf is their football. It's the way of having competition. Going out with the guys and having some fun with the guys and having a beer afterwards. So those guys are nuts about it, and I love being around them.
Outstanding, Joe, and so appreciative of the time you've taken with us here at Says Who Sports. Lastly, I'll ask you, what do you say about your gratitude or appreciation for the run that you've had, and hopefully still many seasons ahead of that for you, but your appreciation for it and what it's given you, and then to the youngsters out there, like you said, great way to put it, the wannabes coming up, and not necessarily advice, what insight would you offer to them, or do you offer?
Well, going back to your first part of that question is, I'm always appreciative every day. I realize how fortunate I am, to start with Ken Green, who won 3 times. Not that it's always about winning stuff, but the fact that he had a nice run and won 3 times, a nice 20-year run with Fred, and a 10-year run with Tiger, and obviously they won plenty of tournaments. They won a lot of big tournaments. So I do look back and know how fortunate I am. As a caddy, I'm competitive like everybody else, so you always want more. You want your guy to finish higher. You want more wins and stuff like that. But I also look back and say, listen, it's been a pretty good run. I've worked for great players. I've won a lot. But on top of all that, these guys are great guys. And I've never really had a bad day on the golf course. When I say a bad day, I've worked for guys that never come back to you. They take ownership of everything. They make you feel like a part of their life, part of their team. When I used to work with Tiger when he was practicing, coming back from injuries and stuff, or maybe changing his swing a little bit, he'd have me down to his house. I'd stay at his beach house. I'd stay on his boat. It was included in every meal. We'd go fishing together and stuff like that, shoot hoop together. Same thing with Fred. We'd go to sporting events, shoot hoop together and stuff like that. So not only fortunate to work for guys that play great, but to treat you basically like family or their best friend. Incredible. And then in terms of advice that I give the young kids, because there are kids looking to do what I do, I say, listen, it's easy for me to say the life's been great, because basically look who I've worked for and what's happened. But it's like any job. And I tell people, I said, you got to work your butt off. That's all it is for me. Just very, very, work as hard as you possibly can and stay as positive as you can. Because it's easy to get down when your guy's missing cuts, not making putts, stuff like that. So you got to stay positive and work your butt off.
Outstanding. Joe LaCava, the pride of Newtown, Connecticut, laying it down for us on Says Who Sports. Joe, again, so appreciate you. Love what you've shared with us. Best to you. Joe LaCava on the bag for Pat Cantlay, and rich history with Freddie Couples and Tiger Woods. Joe, thanks so much again. Best to you. We'll be watching, and have a great rest of the season.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you too, Joe.